It is September 2025, 5 years and some months after COVID-19 changed everything. Where do I start? Well, I'll start at the beginning of the end. In January of 2020, a virus was detected, known as COVID-19 or the coronavirus. The virus eventually infected the entire world, well, at least most of it. There were isolated tribes deep in South America in the rainforest that generally were not affected by the pandemic, along with other small pockets of humanity that were untouched. Conspiracy theories regarding where the virus originated began, and some said it came from a filthy wet market in Wuhan, China, where they sold every live animal or creature that crawled, slithered, flew, or walked on all fours to serve an exotic fetish for unusual meal. Some said it was released from a level 4 microbiology lab in the same Chinese province. No one believed the reports coming out of China regarding the numbers of infected. Who could actually believe them? Others claimed it was the Earth's revenge against humanity or God's judgment. I suppose we will never know for sure. The large cities around the world were dealt the worst effects of this virus. In the beginning, world governments tried to stop the spread, but were ultimately ineffective. The United States passed a giant stimulus package filled with tons of political pork, with just a mere toss of scraps to the American people, who then used the money to buy bullets, guns, toilet paper, and food. Governments and politicians who sought to increase their political power took this pandemic as an opportunity to expand their influence and leverage political gains, largely infringing on the rights of the people. Early in spring of 2020, things were generally calm. People were in lockdown but could occasionally go out to buy food and supplies. But every time the store shelves were restocked, they were quickly emptied by those in panic and fear of the uncertainty brought on mostly by the endless 24/7 media coverage of the pandemic. The delivery supply chain was not broken. It was just not able to keep up with the increasing demand. More truckers joined the ranks of those making runs to the distribution centers. The criminal element figured out quickly that they could just hijack a fully loaded big rig and make a huge score of goods. After stories of attacks on big rigs surfaced, truckers armed themselves to the teeth as a defense from ambush attacks. Since the truck drivers were now armed, bandits would ambush a truck and not only hijack a fully loaded tractor-trailer of goods, but also the guns and ammo the truck driver had with them for protection. It became a very lucrative endeavor for the bandits and a no-win situation for the trucking industry. It got so bad that truck drivers ultimately stopped making supply runs. They were overwhelmed, ambushed, outgunned, and the minimal pay was not worth the risk. Law enforcement accompanied some truckers as an armed escort for real critical emergency supply runs, but as the virus started to infect first responders and law enforcement, most just stayed home with their families, worried that they would become infected with the virus as well. The supply chains came to a grinding halt. Most businesses were already closed, aside from the essential industries. Restaurants and bars suffered the most from closing up shop. The stock markets tanked as unemployment began to rise in record numbers. Those unemployed lost all sense of hope as unemployment checks gradually stopped coming in. A lot of people lived paycheck to paycheck and had little or no savings to cover rent, mortgages, loans, and expenses for even 1 month. Foreclosures were not enforced because law enforcement would not go in and make good on an eviction notice for fear that the homeowner or tenant would greet them with a loaded shotgun to the face at the door. Banks became insolvent and governments printed money like there was no tomorrow, which in turn drove inflation to an extreme. The resulting worldwide depression was devastating beyond anything ever seen in history, and this was only just the beginning. In the spring of 2021, the virus returned with a vengeance and mutated for a third time, as it did in the fall of 2020. As was expected by virologists and experts in the field, the virus was given a new name of COVID-21, as it had become an entirely different strain from the COVID-20 and COVID-19. Healthcare systems worldwide were stretched beyond the capacity to respond to the exponential growth of COVID-21. The third wave of the pandemic had just started, and healthcare workers and hospital beds were in high demand, and PPEs were in short supply. Many tried to clean and reuse them, but to no avail. Those who prepared for a myriad of shit-hit-the-fan events generally fared well if they had 1 to 2 years of freeze-dried foods and didn't think it was too crazy to stock up on hand sanitizers, antiseptic wipes, gloves, and N95 masks. The spread of the COVID-19 virus was exacerbated by those who self-quarantined at home during the late winter and early spring. Suffering from cabin fever, anxiety, and stress, they ignored the beach and park closures and came out to gather in droves early in May of 2020. Debates about the efficacy of wearing a mask slowing the virus spread began. Contradictions of advice from so-called experts ran rampant. They said wearing a mask is not going to protect you. Others said we should mandate the wearing of masks in public. Still, many didn't even have masks to wear. They made up ones, makeshift. Yet they crowded the supermarkets on a daily basis, spreading the virus. A push to nationalize industries began by progressive politicians who had other nefarious ideas to control as much as possible in the private sector. Unfortunately, it came to pass. Every farm, distribution center, and grocery store chain were now under the government's control. The food rationing began. Food rationing had one caveat though. RFID chip implants were now mandatory. If you wanted food and the government now controlled the food supply chain, you got a chip implant. Many rejected the idea of a mandatory chip implant, and an underground barter system was born. Those that accepted the chip implant were under complete government control. Every time they made any type of transaction, the chip was scanned. The chip contained a wealth of information, including medical records, political party affiliation, and whether you owned a firearm. Food riots were commonplace everywhere, and martial law was even more common. Curfews, checkpoints, and detention centers were something some people felt was needed to keep everyone safe. The police state was born. It was around this time that, they found me.